Hello and welcome back to Morlo No Bore. Here with me, hopefully, because I didn't give him a count-in, is Joshua, and he's going to tell us the full story of Amumu. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well, My last time my voice changed didn't work, but it's okay.
You win some, you lose some.
Speaking of losing some, it's the sad mummy. He loses
Yeah.
everything.
Well, tell us about it, Josh. The floor is yours.
So, Amumu is in the world of Runeterra, more of a story than anything kind of confirmed, where many people believe he was a young Shruman prince. Others believe he was the only Yordle emperor of Shurima. There's been lots of speculation on who exactly Amumu is. From the most notable is being the only Yordle emperor of Shurima who claimed that he would walk among the people until he was shown kindness, and was never shown kindness by any of his people, not realizing as he dressed as a peasant, and they believed him not to be who he was, so they treated him poorly, and he ended up dying on the streets, and that's his curse. The other, which I tend to believe, is that he's a young child who was well loved but died early on, and has been cursed since then to search for a friend.
Hmm.
The story I was telling during the podcast itself is called Greed and Tears, and it's about an older gentleman who is telling a story to his village, uh, and he's explaining how Shrima during these times have been rocked by earthquakes, usually involving the void or ascended. It's kind of falling apart, but these earthquakes are basically opening up tombs and other things that have long been lost, and one of these being Amumu's tomb. So the older man is telling a story about how this young boy goes into young boy might be too young, more of like 20-year-old goes into the tomb and begins to explore after an earthquake opens it up, and he's talking about how this young explorer sees hieroglyphics on the wall explaining a boy prince, uh how he seemed to be loved by his people, how he had all this gold and wealth and all that. Um, One of these, and upon these images, he also finds a small golden statue, which he takes. He intends to leave because he's afraid that others will come and kill him for the statue and for the other treasures that are clearly deeper in the tomb. Um, when he hears crying, uh, not wanting to leave a child in the darkness of a tomb that no one's explored yet, he decides to go deeper despite his gut kind of telling him not to. Uh, he sees one last image before he goes deep into the tomb. It's of the boy prince lying dead, everyone around him crying. Uh, People in the back, though, were celebrating, and it makes him question if the boy prince that had been loved in all the previous pictures may have not been so loved after all.
Hmm.
Um, so he thinks that he's trying to convince himself that he doesn't hear this weeping. He's saying it's the wind, uh, but the further he goes, it's becoming more obvious. And despite his gut telling him to run, he continues to go, and he eventually comes into a chamber that's full of gold and jewels, and it's magnificent, but it's also filled with water. Uh, and he's kind of shocked by this, but he kneels down and brings some to his lips, and it's salt water. It's Which is very confusing since they're in the middle of Shurima. There's no seas. It's a desert. Like, there's nothing. Um, and he sees a little figure at the other end of the room, and he makes his way over, and he asks if the figure's lost, and he hears the voice respond that he doesn't remember, and he doesn't know who he is. and he reassures the child that it's going to be all right, like everything's going to be okay. He's there now, and he goes to put his hand on the figure, and he figures out it's a statue. Um, and he's shocked by this because he realizes now that the voice is coming from somewhere else, and that's when a hand grabs his arm, and he looks down and he sees this tiny mummy uh, who looks up at him and asks if he will be his friend. Uh, Terrified, he jumps back and he notices that his hand starts to slowly die. It starts turning black and it starts slowly moving up his arm as it shrivels and starts to turn into dust. Um, he's realizes he's going to die basically. He drops his lantern and runs out, and Amumu starts screaming back at him that he's sorry, he didn't mean to, please come back. uh Now he runs out and he escapes into the night, and that's how Amumu was exposed to all of Shurima. And now at this point, all the kids and the people in the crowd are arguing, oh no, Amumu isn't real. Amumu is real. He just wants a friend. He's a Yordle, blah blah blah. And all these kids are laughing, and eventually they start making their way back. Um, One child though stays behind and asks her grandfather, who it was the person telling the story, how he lost his arm. And this person looks down, the storyteller looks down at his arm, which we now are told that he doesn't have. It's been cut off, and he says with a small laugh and chuckle, he wishes his granddaughter good night, and that's where the story ends.
His wishes his granddaughter could what? I'm sorry?
Good night. He wishes her good night.
Oh, he wishes her good night.
Yeah, he never answers her question.
Gotcha.
So
And
it's implied that he is the main character that lost his arm.
Yes. Yeah, I got that. And so with the Amumu thing in the beginning, you sort of said that there's two theories about what he was before?
There's lots of kind of theories on
Two main ones?
Yeah, the main point of Amumu is that he's always searching for a friend, but no one seems to know exactly who he is. There's stories that he's like he's related to the first ruling family of Shurima. That there's one of where like he's the Yordle. There's various stories about that all kind of parallel each other. Yeah, like the one of the Yordle says he was the first and last Yordle Shurima who believed in the innate goodness of the human heart. To prove his detractors wrong, he swore an oath to live as a beggar until he made one true friend, convinced his people would rally to help their fellow Shuriman. He ended up dying on the streets without anyone ever offering him even a single gold coin.
Okay.
So
like, I'm more apt to believe that he was a prince because generally speaking, only royalty was mummified in like Egypt.
Well, he definitely was a prince. It's more of a question of like, was he human or a Yordle? And I tend to be on the side that he was a child. And his just demeanor and kind of the way he carries himself makes me believe he's more of a child.
Couldn't he have been a child Yordle?
Yordles tend to be thousands of years old. Lulu is like the youngest Yordle known, and she was literally transported in time, and she's still like thousands of years old.
Well, I understand that, but they do have to be 1 year old at some point.
I mean, yes, but I think with the way he talks, the way he acts, he's more childlike than Yordlish. Yordles have a bit of whimsy to them, where Amumu, I mean, even Vagar, who's considered the evilest Yordle and has a somewhat dark backstory, still is kind of cartoonish, where Amumu acts more like a child who has been alone or abandoned.
Yeah. And so his curse is that he can't have friends because he kills them, basically.
Yeah, and in the music video, we see the effect, like he wanders into that small town, and ends up destroying it because of his sadness. He doesn't mean to. He just like he basically has a temper tantrum because even that I don't feel like is an accurate way to describe it, but it's the only way I can think of at the moment. But he basically has this little temper tantrum and just ends up destroying an entire town because of it. So like
It's awfully nice of him. He must have been AP Amumu. Nice. So how does his story connect to other Shirimans, if any?
It doesn't at the moment. Him and Rammus are more mythical figures of Shrima, but they kind of show the culture and of Shrima. They are both considered like legendary figures, that are passed down from by stories from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because so many people in Shrima seem to empathize with Amumu. And there's not much anyone can do to help him though.
Yeah.
Like he's kind of like unless somebody breaks the curse, which nobody has really been able to do because there's no way Amumu can really communicate. Like how does a child or Yordle communicate that everyone he touches dies or becomes friends with dies? He's basically trapped forever in the cycle.
I wonder, I always know, I understand that he's sad, but I wonder if I feel like he laughs a lot too when you listen to his voice lines. I wonder if he's this weird sadistic person that enjoys luring people in.
That's actually an interesting theory. It's not something I've considered, but it's definitely it's definitely a possibility. Like the interesting thing about Amumu is how, like Rammus, there's no real confirmation on what exactly is true about Amumu. The only thing we have to go off of is stories that have been passed down from generations to generations. So really, this is one of the cool things where when League redid their lore, they became a lot more definitive on everything. They started taking harder stances. Whereas the older lore was like a paragraph for each character, and then your imagination can run wild. Now it's like, this is what happens. This is how it works. And now Amumu and Rammus are perhaps two of the only characters where you can actually have these headcanons. You can actually have these interesting theories because there's no evidence to really say that you're wrong. So Amumu could totally be somebody who's very sadistic. He could be a predator that's luring things, and unless we get more updates on him, we have that's a very valid theory that's could totally happen.
Well, I based that theory out of 2020. But it's just feel like that's what Amumu would be in 2020.
Yeah, you know what? He's the perfect predator.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Amumu before or what do you want to leave people with about Amumu that they just must know? The one thing that you want to leave them with?
Just be his friend. If joking aside though, I would definitely check out. I know a lot of people have heard the song, but I would definitely recommend watching the Sad Mummy music video. It really captures the character of Amumu very well, and it's beautifully written, beautifully sung. The art style is amazing. I would definitely encourage people to start watching the videos that have been released, even though they're kind of old now. It's just always good to go back and see, support these side projects Riot's been doing to show both the characters and their own work.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Cool. So Josh, thank you so much for sharing that story. Sorry, my phone just went off when that's your finishing. Thank you so much for sharing your Mumu, not that it's your story, but your knowledge about Amumu with everyone. I hope that you have a great night, and I hope everybody out there has a great night. We will see you again next week with, more lore, no bore, and also the podcast next Tuesday starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night.